A Foggy Morning. Chapter 2. Bodega Bay. Mike and Carlos have lunch with Kate and Sally. It is noisy at lunchtime because everyone is talking and laughing.
Tell me about the math test,
says Kate.
Let's not talk about it. We're eating,
says Mike.
All right,
says Kate.
then let's talk about Martha's birthday party next week.
Oh, no,
says Carlos, looking at Mike. On Saturday morning, Mr. Sullivan says,
I'm going to Bodega Bay. I have an appointment at 11 to see a boat for sale. Who wants to come with me?
We do, say Kate, Mike, and Mrs. Sullivan. Lucky barks happily. They get into the car and drive north across the Golden Gate Bridge. Bodega Bay is a small town on the coast.
Listen,
says Kate.
can you hear a bell?
A bell?
Says Mr. Sullivan.
No, it's not a bell. It's a strange noise.
Very strange, and I don't like it.
Says Kate. It is a very foggy morning in Bodega Bay. They drive to a small pier and stop. There are 5 boats at the pier. Lucky, stay in the car and don't bark, says Mrs. Sullivan to the little dog. Mr. Sullivan goes and talks to a thin old man with white hair. He is wearing a blue jacket and a blue hat.
Hello, are you Jack Wilson?
Asks Mr. Sullivan.
Yeah, I'm Jack Wilson.
Says the old man, smiling.
I'm Frank Sullivan. This is my wife, Liz, and these are my children, Kate and Mike. Pleased to meet you.
Says Jack Wilson.
You have a nice family. Yes, I do, thanks.
Says Mr. Sullivan.
Are you from Bodega Bay? No, I'm from Monterrio.
Says Jack. Where's that? Asks Mrs. Sullivan.
Monterrio's a small town up in the hills north of Bodega Bay.
Says Jack.
You're here to see the cabin cruiser, aren't you? Yes, we are.
Says Mr. Sullivan.
Good. Follow me.
Says Jack. Everyone follows Jack to the end of the pier, and they get on a big cabin cruiser.
Here's the Pacific Queen,
says Jack.
This is the deck and the lifeboat, and that's the cockpit. Downstairs, there's a big galley, a cabin with 2 bunks, another cabin with 4 bunks, and a bathroom. It's very nice.
it's super.
Says Mike, looking at Kate. Is this your boat? Asks Mrs. Sullivan. Suddenly, Jack's eyes are sad and he stops smiling.
No.
Who does it belong to? Asks Mrs. Sullivan.
This boat doesn't belong to anyone,
Says Jack nervously.
but the town of Bodega Bay wants to sell it.
I don't understand, says Mrs. Sullivan, looking at the old man. Something's wrong,
We're interested in the boat.
says Mr. Sullivan.
It's perfect for my job and for my family.
But Frank, there's something strange about this boat, says Mrs. Sullivan.
Oh, Liz.
Says Mr. Sullivan.
I like the Pacific Queen and the price is right. I want to buy it.
They get off the cabin cruiser, and Mr. Sullivan and Jack talk together on the pier. Mrs. Sullivan, Kate, and Mike go to the tourist office. There are pictures of old sailing ships on the wall. A tall woman at the tourist office says, Good morning, how can I help you?
Hello.
Says Mike.
We want to learn more about Bodega Bay.
Well, Bodega Bay has an interesting history, says the woman. You can read about it in the blue book on the table, and there are a lot of pictures on the wall. Kate looks at the pictures and says,
Read the sign, Mike.
Shipwrecks at Bodega Bay and Point Race, 1608 to 2007.
says Mike.
There are a lot of shipwrecks.
The woman says, This is a dangerous place for ships and boats. There's always a lot of fog at sea, and other bad things too. Kate looks at one of the pictures and is surprised.
Mike,
She says,
look at this big picture of a Spanish sailing ship. It's in my history book, too.
Wow,
says Mike.
here it says Sonora, Spanish sailing ship, 1608.
Yes, says the woman sadly. That's a picture of the Sonora, and 1608 is the year of the shipwreck. You know a lot about Bodega Bay, says Mrs. Sullivan. What do you know about the Pacific Queen? Suddenly, the woman's face becomes white, and she says, It's only a story, but...
But what?
asks Kate. Please don't ask me about the Pacific Queen, says the woman, and she walks away. Mrs. Sullivan, Kate, and Mike go back to the car and see Mr. Sullivan.
Well, the Pacific Queen is ours,
Says Mr. Sullivan happily.
Jack Wilson is going to bring it to Marina Harbor in San Francisco next week. Are you happy?
Yes, Dad.
Says Mike.
We can take our friends on the boat.
Says Kate. There's something strange about the boat and about this place, says Mrs. Sullivan. The woman in the tourist office says there's a story,
Oh, come on.
says Mr. Sullivan laughing.
People in small towns love stories. We can take some great trips on the boat. You're going to love it, Liz.